Welcome to the Gentleman's Guide to Gaming. You know how this is going to start, don't you? As soon as I say a backer, you know how that's going to go now, don't you? If you watched any of my recent videos, but I'm going to say it anyway. A backer of The World Below on Backika who decided they wanted to put money down for the deluxe version of The World Below, thank you very much, message me via MatthewDawkins.com as the ritual dictates to say, I've bought your damn book, now give me something, as if the book isn't enough. I would like your advice on how to best run a game of Call of Cthulhu. Is it true that all characters should go insane or die at the end? So first things first, let's throw that meme out the window immediately. Because, yes, I am certainly guilty of it. Unfortunately, I know most keepers who are guilty of it have at some point or other gone with that old trope of all Call of Cthulhu games must end with all investigators dead or insane. It's especially popular at convention games of Call of Cthulhu, and it's why I never play Call of Cthulhu at conventions anymore, because I know exactly how the tales are going to end. It's great when you first learn a game of Call of Cthulhu, and it's the reason games like 10 Candles and Dread are also so fun, as well as their gimmicks. But I think we need to get away from that idea that the games have a nihilistic finality to them. I think that if you're running Call of Cthulhu, you need to think a little more broader than that. You need to think about tone, you need to think about horror, you need to think about era, you need to think about the characters, and it needs to be less about, oh, you're all marching toward your doom, because then it makes everything seem futile. And I acknowledge that in cosmic horror there is a certain futility. Humanity is weak in the face of great old ones and their various spawn that crawl in and under the earth and the rest, but yeah, the idea that death and or destruction or insanity is inevitable is just boring to me now. I've done it too much, played it too much. So I just mentioned a few things like tone and horror and character. Let's talk about characters first. It seems to be an often missed out part of Call of Cthulhu that characters matter. We don't question it in games like World of Darkness, Chronicles of Darkness, Curseborn, The World Below, where the characters are centre stage. But because everything in Call of Cthulhu is so existential, the investigators can often feel like they are just tiny pieces on a board waiting to be swept off. I think the nature of a character is fundamental to the story that you're playing in Call of Cthulhu. And the characters' fates are tied to the characters they are. Are they characters who are likely to read the forbidden text? Are they characters who will push themselves beyond their limits? Are they characters who will back off at the crucial moment and say, I need to check myself into a sanitarium to understand any of this, or I need to join the priesthood, or I just need to get to the other side of the world? These sorts of questions are very important. You can look at character origins. It's quite common, especially if you're playing in the 1920s era, to have characters who are veterans of the Great War. It's a great period to pull shaken characters from. Spiritualism is pretty high. The world was very nearly destroyed, in Europe at least. So you have characters who are already familiar with existential crises, now facing something that goes beyond a machine gun and trench warfare and the rest. But characters are vital, and I think that the best Call of Cthulhu keepers will work with their players on their characters, will find out what characters they want to play and the sorts of journeys they want to go on. If they have any interest in the mythos, if they are just skeptics who are on along for the ride or trying to disprove it. And what's more, you should be able to cater for them during the course of gameplay to their tastes. Especially the skeptics. You should allow for the occasional charlatan to appear, especially if that charlatan is then ignominiously destroyed by an actual supernatural entity witnessed only by one of your believers. So the skeptic confronts the charlatan and says, I know your magician to be a trick, your magic to be a trick. I know that you're not communicating with the dead. I found the proof here. I'm going to leave the room for a moment, and you're going to write up your confession. Skeptic walks off, leaving the fake spiritualist and the believer in the room, and all of a sudden a spectral entity devours the spiritualist. And oh, wouldn't you know, these things do exist, but the skeptic is still kept in the dark. Part of that idea of mystery, keeping some characters in the dark, not the players, but the characters in the dark, is a good way of extending a Call of Cthulhu story. You don't just throw a shoggoth at them in the first session. You need to build up, and this is why cultists are so popular. Sometimes cultists are very heavily leaned upon, I would argue, to the detriment of the rest of the game, because they are the natural human foils. But good keepers will also use law enforcement. They will also use gangsters, again, to reference the 1920s. We've got a lot of bootleggers. We've got a lot of gangsters running up and down the east coast of America, which is a popular location for 1920s Call of Cthulhu. So you've got the character aspect, and you should always keep in mind what the characters' ambitions are, what their fears are, who their loved ones are, who their rivals are, because other characters should interweave into this story, not just to act as foils or people who are put in peril and the protagonist now needs to save, but also because by introducing other NPCs, what you're doing is creating a nest of backup characters should death or insanity come, or should that protagonist need to take a step back, R&R, and so their brother takes up in their stead, takes some time off work to help out their brother's friends. Next we have horror and tone, and horror is, I think, quite an easy thing to evoke. It's one of the easiest emotions to evoke at the table, because you can be very visceral and grotesque about it. Suspense is more challenging, but more satisfying, I think, if you can build it up correctly. A lot of that is about, as I say, you don't throw the shoggoth at them immediately. Hell, you don't throw human sacrifice at them immediately. What you do is you throw aspects of the uncanny, things that just don't feel right. It's when you break into a house, let's say, because you've heard there's a serial killer there, and rather than finding his victims and rather than finding the killer, you find sigils painted on the walls. In the hallway, they're spaced out, but the deeper into the house you go, the closer and closer they are together, until finally you reach a door. I guarantee by the time they reach that door, they are going to be terrified of opening it, because there's nothing more ubiquitous in Call of Cthulhu than not wanting to open the door, other than the death and insanity clauses that exist in this game. So building suspense and horror is very important, but I think one of the missed aspects is how to dial it back. It is incredibly important in good games of Call of Cthulhu to give the players and their investigators a chance to do things that aren't related to horror. You need to occasionally ground them in things they enjoy, partly so that you can, turn the tap on and off when you need to, and make sure it's not a constant onslaught, because if it is, you lose all suspense, you lose all tone, if it's just horror non-stop. There's a couple of things. One, if you go back to the real world and everything is normal and you're back with your family, yes, your sanity can recover. Yes, your luck might be able to recover. But more importantly than that, your characters, your investigators now have the opportunity to know what it is they're fighting for. The longer you're out in the field, if you're looking at a campaign, and I love these campaigns like Masks of Nyarlathotep, Horror on the Orient Express, Shadows of Yog-Sothoth, the farther away you are from your home, the less connected you are. Now, that can be an interesting story because your characters can steadily lose what you'd call humanity in some games, but I think more interesting is being able to hold in contrast the world, the green and pleasant land of the Shire, compared to the horror of the trenches, albeit trenches filled with cosmic horrors. So keep that in mind. Those are some useful tips, I think. Era is the last one I want to cover at this time, although this feels like it could be a video series. Maybe if you want to hear about specific Call of Cthulhu campaigns and how best to run them, I can talk about them, because I've ran a lot. In fact, I've run more Call of Cthulhu than any other RPG. It is the game I run easiest, or most easily. If people ever just say I want to play Call of Cthulhu, I can go, right, okay, make up some characters, and I will come up with a story there and then, because it's a very easy game to run. The system's easy, D percentile, roll under your skill, boom, done. Luck is lovely and evocative, as is sanity. It's a simple horror game. But, era. This is something I disagree with Sandy Peterson on, and I interviewed him on this channel, and I loved talking to him. This was many years ago, and Sandy said to me that his preferred era for Call of Cthulhu is the modern or contemporary era, because he feels the players are more invested in the horror. And I agree with him on that, but I feel, as a keeper, that I get most emotion, most reaction, most investment out of my players when I use a historical setting, because they come up with more vivid character ideas. They want to interplay with the elements of the era that they find so interesting. So whether you're running it Invictus, so back in ancient Rome, Gaslight, Regency era, 1920s, Cold War Cthulhu, there's lots of different options here, and each one has their own flavour. And it isn't just great for character building, it's also fantastic for scene setting, because so much evocative media is set in a historic era. I also appreciate the detachment that exists between a historic era and us, the players. I feel like throwing modern horror at someone over and over again, and I do love plenty of modern horror games, can work, but I think that in the historic era there is, because there's less communication, there's less understanding of the world and its ills, there's less understanding of a character's struggles, which means, I mentioned connection to humanity earlier. When your character starts saying that they are seeing things, that they are, let's say, experiencing horrors that cannot be described, that is going to go two ways in a historic horror game. Either you're going to find people who believe you because they're not informed enough to be cynical, or they're going to throw you into a sanitarium or call you a lunatic or shun you. They're not going to try and approach you and get some scientific proof, excluding some NPCs who become vital afterwards. You've been in a padded cell now for the best part of 3 weeks, and there's a knock on the door. You've got a visitor. He's a professor, and he wants to take you out and prove some of your theories. All of a sudden, you've got a new adventure ahead of you. In short, there's lots of ways to play Call of Cthulhu, and those are some of my tips for doing so. I hope this has been a useful video. If you want more videos like this, do ask, and if you want to support me, do back my Patreon. What's more, if you want a video of your own, do pick up a copy of The World Below or They Came from the RPG Anthology and contact me via MatthewDawkins.com. Thank you very much for watching.